The mist clings low over the cobblestones, curling like pale fingers through the square. Lanterns sway on iron hooks, their flames guttering in the cold dawn breeze. Beneath their trembling light, a shape waits in silence, its wooden frame towering, its rim studded with iron. A wheel, not meant for travel, but for unmaking. The crowd gathers early, their boots grinding frost into the earth. Peasants clutch cloaks to their shoulders, merchants whisper into gloved hands, and children, dragged along by parents, press their faces into wool to avoid what their eyes cannot resist. They have come, as always, not for justice, but for spectacle. The breaking wheel does not merely kill, it stages the slow unravelling of the human form. At the centre, bound to the stake, stands a man. His name is lost to time, but his terror is not. His wrists are lashed, his ankles fixed in place, and his breath escapes in shallow bursts that cloud into the morning air. He trembles as though every nerve has already heard the verdict. Some say he was a thief, others whisper worse, that he murdered on a lonely road. The truth hardly matters now. The wheel does not require truth. It requires flesh. The hush is heavier than any sermon. Not even the town bell dares intrude. All that breaks the silence is the groan of wood as the executioner adjusts his weapon, an iron-shod cudgel, thick as a man's arm, weighted for bone. He lifts it once, testing its heft. The condemned man turns his head to the crowd, searching for a face. Any face that will see him as more than an offering to this ritual of cruelty. He finds none. It is here, in this silence, that the true horror begins. For the wheel was not conceived to deliver quick punishment. It was crafted to erase dignity, to take the human body, upright, proud, made in the image of God, and bend it into a grotesque parody of itself. One bone at a time, one scream at a time. But before we descend deeper into this spectacle of cruelty, if you are drawn to history's darkest corners, if the shadows of the past compel you as they compel me, then join this journey. Subscribe now, because what follows will not simply horrify, it will challenge everything you thought you knew about punishment, about justice, and about the boundless imagination of human cruelty. What comes next has made even seasoned historians shudder. The executioner lowers the cudgel. The man's chest rises in desperate heaves, his eyes wide, his lips forming prayers that vanish in the chill. The crowd leans forward as one body waiting for the first crack, waiting for the sound that will confirm what they came to hear. But let us pause, suspended at the very instant before flesh meets iron, frozen in that breathless moment where dread outweighs sound. For to understand why the wheel stood in every market square, why it became the chosen theatre of justice for centuries, we must step back. Back beyond the dawn mist, beyond this one man's terror. We must ask, what led Europe to invent a device not merely of death, but of display? Why was suffering made into a spectacle, a sermon of bones? The answer does not lie in this square alone. It lies in centuries of belief, in the iron logic of punishment as performance, in the marriage of law and cruelty that turned towns into amphitheatres of horror. And so, before the cudgel falls, before the first bone splinters beneath iron weight, let us travel backward, to the origins of this wheel, to the theology that sanctified it, the laws that demanded it, and the hunger for order that made entire cities complicit in suffering. For this is not just one man's end. This is civilization's darkest mirror. To understand how we got here, we must step back into the heart of medieval Europe's obsession with public suffering. The wheel that waits in the square did not appear out of madness. It was not the fever dream of a single executioner, nor the invention of a tyrant drunk on power. Its roots stretched deeper, woven through centuries of belief, shaped by the logic of the law and sanctified by theology itself. To understand the breaking wheel, we must peel back the centuries until we stand in Rome. The Romans, masters of order and spectacle, had long perfected the art of death as performance. Crucifixion lined their roads, branding iron scorched the flesh of criminals, and arenas drowned in the roar of blood and sand. The empire understood that punishment was not merely retribution, it was theatre, a message carved into bodies for the living to read. When Rome fractured and the Middle Ages dawned, Europe inherited this cruel stagecraft. The wheel was not born in an instant. It was adapted, moulded, given new purpose by kings and courts, desperate to prove that justice was strong and divine wrath ever present. What had once been an empire of legions became a continent of faith. The priest replaced the emperor, the sermon replaced the senate, but the lesson was the same. Fear maintains order. Here lies the paradox. The wheel, which to our eyes seems barbaric beyond measure, was once seen as righteous, not a tool of cruelty, but an arm of God. Judges spoke the sentence with solemn weight, not as monsters, but as servants of holy justice, and the people believed. They gathered not only out of morbid curiosity, but because they were told that to witness was to participate in divine order. The body broken on the wheel was more than a criminal. It was a warning, a sacrifice, a spectacle meant to cleanse the community of sin. And yet, beneath this sacred veneer, there was something chilling. For the wheel was never designed to dispatch life quickly. Unlike the sword, swift and decisive, the wheel demanded time. It demanded attention. The condemned body was stretched upon its rim not for efficiency, but for endurance, for the drawn-out theatre of agony. Consider this. The wheel, a symbol of movement, was stilled, frozen in place. It was no longer a device of travel, but of paralysis. Stripped of motion, it became the perfect stage upon which to fracture the human form. First small bones, then long ones. First the arms, then the legs. Strike after strike, each delivered in measured sequence, until the skeleton itself became a shattered map of suffering. This was not random violence. It was codified ritual. Manuals and decrees dictated the order in which the blows were struck. Jurists recorded it with chilling precision. How many fractures for a thief? How many for a murderer? In some places, mercy was offered. A single strike to the chest, ending the ordeal before it truly began. In others, no such kindness existed, and the condemned endured each calculated break until flesh clung to bone in silence. Here we glimpse the heart of the matter. The wheel was not an invention of chaos. It was an invention of order, a cruel arithmetic in which pain became a form of mathematics and the body a canvas for legal authority. To fracture bone was to reinforce law. To shatter limbs was to declare that no one, no bandit, no heretic, no rebel, stood above the hand of justice. Archaeology confirms what chronicles whisper. Graves uncovered in forgotten fields reveal skeletons bent and twisted beyond natural form, bones fused at strange angles, ribs shattered, skulls caved inward. The earth still holds the evidence of this grim arithmetic, preserved long after the last wheel rotted into dust. And so we return to the paradox. This device of suffering was once considered divine. Priests blessed it, crowds accepted it, rulers wielded it as proof of their power. To the people of the age, it was not cruelty, it was necessity. Only now, with centuries between us, can we see it for what it truly was. Not the justice of God, but the theatre of cruelty perfected. The breaking wheel was never random. Its horror followed a script. Each fracture, Each scream, each pause was part of a ritual refined across centuries, a choreography of agony. And it is that ritual, the step-by-step unfolding of the wheel's dreadful performance, that we must now witness. The wheel did not begin with death. It began with preparation. The condemned was dragged into the square, sometimes tied to a cart, sometimes forced to stumble barefoot across the stones. His body already weakened by days in a dungeon, his spirit already broken by the weight of the sentence. The crowd pressed forward, their breath steaming in the cold air, eager not to miss a moment. First came the binding. The executioner's assistants tied the man's limbs to wooden stakes laid flat upon the ground. Ankles stretched apart, wrists lashed tight, his body drawn into the shape of a cross. Above him loomed the instrument itself, a great wooden wheel mounted not to roll, but to turn slowly like some monstrous halo. Then, the silence, the kind that feels like pressure on the chest. The cudgel was lifted, heavy with iron, its surface stained with the history of those who had come before. And when it fell, the sound was not a scream, not at first, but a sharp, splintering crack, the sound of bone giving way. The victim cried out, a sound torn from somewhere between body and soul. The crowd answered with its own gasp, some crossing themselves, others leaning in closer. Children turned their faces, yet peered through trembling fingers. Justice, they were told, was unfolding before them. But what they saw was something far older, far darker. A ritual meant to break not only the man, but the idea of rebellion itself. The executioner worked with method. He did not strike wildly. Each blow had an order. First the shins, then the thighs. First the forearms, then the upper arms. The cudgel fell with deliberate rhythm, transforming bone into splinters, flesh into swollen masses of bruised colour. Each fracture stretched the man closer to the wheel's embrace, his body bending, reshaping into something unrecognisable. Sometimes this ritual lasted hours, the condemned slipping in and out of consciousness, revived only by buckets of cold water, his suffering prolonged for the sake of spectacle. It was said that a skilled executioner could draw out life across a dozen blows or more, pacing the torment like a conductor leading a symphony of pain. And yet, within this horror, there was a strange notion of mercy. Some sentences included the coup de grace, a final stroke to the chest or neck, delivered at the start that ended life swiftly before the ritual truly began. Others denied that grace, demanding every bone broken while the victim still breathed. The choice rested not in the crowd, not in the executioner, but in the decree of the court. Mercy and cruelty were matters of paperwork. Imagine the psychology of such a performance. To the condemned, every breath was a question. Would the next blow bring release, or only more agony? To the crowd, every strike was a lesson. Parents whispered to their children, "This is what happens when you defy the law." The church sanctioned the ritual, preaching that the wheel purified sin through suffering, that broken flesh mirrored the torments of hell itself. And so, ordinary people became witnesses, even participants, in cruelty sanctified as justice. The spectacle bound them together. The man on the wheel was no longer just himself. He was a thief, a heretic, a murderer, but also a vessel upon which fear was inscribed. Each scream reminded the living of the cost of disobedience. Each fracture echoed not only through bone, but through the collective memory of those who stood watching. The final act was as important as the first. When the blows had done their work, when limbs bent at unnatural angles and silence replaced cries, the executioner lifted what remained of the body and threaded it through the spokes of the wheel. The man was woven into the wood, arms twisted between the rim, legs stretched across its frame, head lolling downward like a grotesque crown. Raised high upon a post, the wheel became more than an instrument. It became a display, a monument of punishment, left to sway in the wind, to rot in the sun, to be picked clean by crows. The man had been executed, but his body lived on as warning. For days, for weeks, for as long as bones clung to sinew, the wheel turned criminals into symbols. And that was its true power. The wheel did not only kill, it transformed. It remade the condemned into something greater than a man and lesser than a corpse, an emblem of terror, stretched against the sky for all to see. Yet what happened after the cudgel fell and the crowd dispersed was just as chilling. The body on the wheel did not disappear. It lingered. It haunted roads and fields, guarding towns with its silence. The punishment outlived the man. And so we must turn now, not to the act itself, but to its aftermath, to the spectacle of remains, the symbolism of decay, and the strange afterlife of those bound forever to the wheel. The execution never ended with the final blow. Death was only the beginning. What truly gave the breaking wheel its power was not the act of killing, but what came after. The condemned, shattered and silent, was bound into the spokes and raised high above the ground. There he remained, not for minutes, not for hours, but for days, weeks, sometimes even months. His body became a fixture of the landscape, as familiar as the church steeple or the market square. Crows circled overhead, their cries echoing across fields, their black wings descending to pick at exposed flesh. Insects swarmed, drawn to the wounds that never closed. At night, when wind moaned across the open ground, villagers swore they could still hear groans carried in the dark. Mothers warned their children not to stray near the post. Travellers crossed themselves when they passed beneath. The wheel turned the corpse into a sentinel of terror, a reminder that the law never slept. The horror lay not only in sight, but in memory. The condemned did not disappear with burial. He lingered. His body decayed in plain view, collapsing into itself until bone gleamed pale against the weathered wood. And long after flesh was gone, the skeleton remained, a grisly lesson etched against the sky. To live in such a world was to live with punishment as part of the landscape. Every journey along the road, every trip to the market carried the risk of passing beneath one of these skeletal warnings. The condemned no longer spoke, but his silence carried a message louder than words. This is what happens when you defy the order of things. Archaeology has confirmed what chronicles describe. Excavations of forgotten fields and old execution sites have revealed skeletons twisted in impossible shapes, limbs bent sharply, ribs shattered, vertebrae compressed by unnatural force. Some still show the telltale marks of blunt trauma, fractures in sequence, as if the blows of the cudgel still echo through the centuries. The earth itself has kept their testimony. And it was not only criminals who found themselves mounted on these wheels. Bandits, yes. Murderers, certainly. But also rebels, heretics, those who challenged the authority of the crown or the church. To break the body was to break the idea it represented. To mount it upon the wheel was to hang that broken idea in the open air, where it could rot before the eyes of all who passed. In this way, death extended far beyond the individual. It became collective. The wheel punished not only the condemned, but the community who was forced to live with the sight. Children grew up beneath its shadow. Farmers ploughed their fields within sight of its frame. Entire generations carried its memory forward. The condemned man might be forgotten by name, but his body lived on in legend, transformed into a warning that reached across time. And this is where the punishment reveals its deepest cruelty. The agony of bones shattering was not the end. It was the beginning of a second life, a grotesque afterlife, in which the body itself became law made visible. The wheel erased not only dignity, but humanity, until what remained was no longer man but symbol. But perhaps even more unsettling than the act itself was the choice of who to break. For the wheel was not used equally. It was wielded selectively against some more than others, turned into a tool of politics as much as punishment. And so, to understand its full meaning, we must turn from the lonely silhouettes of anonymous criminals to the infamous cases that filled chronicles and darkened history. Cases where the wheel was not simply a sentence, but a message written in flesh for kings, priests, and entire nations. The breaking wheel was never just a punishment for crime. It was also a weapon of power, wielded by rulers to send messages louder than proclamations, sharper than swords. Some of its victims were criminals, yes, but others were chosen precisely because their destruction served a political purpose. One of the most infamous cases unfolded in 16th century Germany. His name was Peter Niers, a bandit lord whispered about across taverns and villages. He was accused not only of robbery and murder, but of witchcraft, cannibalism, even dark pacts with the devil. Whether all the charges were true mattered little. What mattered was that he had terrified the countryside for years, a figure who seemed untouchable. When he was finally captured in 1581, authorities knew that ordinary death would not suffice. They condemned him to the wheel. The chronicles describe his fate in almost clinical detail. 42 blows delivered before his body was braided through the spokes. The number itself mattered. Each fracture was a stroke of justice, each splinter of bone a tally against his supposed sins. His body, left on display, was more than punishment. It was propaganda, a message that the empire was stronger than any outlaw, that chaos itself could be shattered and hung in the air for all to see. But Niers was not alone. Across Europe, rebels, heretics, and political dissidents found themselves woven into the wheel. When order was threatened, the punishment became a public performance designed not just to kill a man, but to annihilate an idea. A rebel broken on the wheel was not only silenced, his very body was bent into a warning against defiance. In France, in the German states, in the Netherlands, the wheel became part of the arsenal of kings and dukes. This was the paradox. The executioner, who by trade committed acts that might seem monstrous, was at the same time elevated, even revered. He was the hand of justice, the keeper of order. Villagers feared him, avoided his touch, yet they also depended on him. When he raised the cudgel, he was no longer a man, but the living embodiment of the law. His blows gave weight to the authority of crown and church alike, and so each case, each execution, extended far beyond the individual condemned. A bandit became a warning to thieves, a heretic became a sermon against blasphemy, a rebel became a symbol of crushed defiance. The wheel was more than wood and iron. It was theatre, propaganda, and fear, woven together in a performance staged before the eyes of all who lived beneath the authority of rulers who claimed divine right. Yet for all its power, the wheel carried within it the seeds of its own downfall. Its cruelty was too great to remain hidden, its spectacle too grotesque to be endured forever. In time, whispers grew louder. Was this truly justice, or was it savagery parading in the robes of law? The same public that once gathered in silence began to question what they saw, and once the questions began, the wheel's fate was sealed. Yet the wheel would not last forever. Its own cruelty guaranteed its downfall, and it is here that we must turn, to its decline, to the moral reckoning that followed, and to the strange legacy it left behind. The wheel did not vanish overnight. It lingered across Europe, its wooden spokes and iron rims still looming in town squares well into the 17th and 18th centuries. But something was shifting. The world itself was changing, and with it, the way societies thought about justice, cruelty, and civilization. The Enlightenment had begun to spread its light, first a flicker, then a blaze. Philosophers, jurists, and reformers began to question not only the wheel, but the entire machinery of public execution. Was it truly justice to break a man bone by bone before the eyes of his children? Or was it savagery dressed in legal robes? Thinkers like Cesare Beccaria, whose On Crimes and Punishments thundered across Europe in 1764, condemned torture and cruel punishments as relics of barbarism. Justice, he argued, should be swift, rational, and humane, not a theatre of agony staged to sate the bloodlust of crowds. Slowly, voices like his began to carry weight. Rulers, once eager to display their power through executions, began to fear that such spectacles revealed weakness instead. Crowds could turn restless. Sympathy could shift toward the condemned. A wheel intended to inspire fear could, under the wrong light, inspire disgust, or worse, rebellion. By the late 18th century, the practice of breaking on the wheel was in steep decline. In France, the revolution swept away not only monarchy but also many of its cruelties. The guillotine replaced the wheel, its blade falling swift and impartial, embodying the Enlightenment's promise of equality before death. Across the German states, in Austria, in the Netherlands, the wheel creaked into obsolescence, remembered more as a relic than a reality. By the 19th century, it had largely disappeared, replaced by punishments that, though still harsh, no longer relied on public torture as theatre. And yet, even as the wheel rotted into history, it did not truly die. It lingered in memory. In folk tales told by firelight, the wheel remained a symbol of ultimate justice. In literature, it appeared again and again as a mark of cruelty, proof of how far civilization had come, and a warning of how easily it could fall back. Dark ballads whispered the fate of criminals broken and displayed. Painters captured its silhouette against stormy skies, a reminder of mankind's fascination with horror sanctified as law. But why? Why did the memory of such cruelty persist, even when the practice itself was gone? The answer lies in the psychology of human society. We invent rituals of cruelty not only to punish, but to reassure ourselves. The wheel was a spectacle of control, a performance that told the living, the law is unbreakable, the order of the world is intact. By displaying the broken body, rulers reinforced the illusion of stability. But in doing so, they revealed something deeper, that civilization is never as secure as it claims. It relies on fear, on ritual, on the spectacle of suffering to hold itself together. And so, the wheel remains with us, not in practice, but in shadow. We no longer gather in the square to watch bones shatter beneath iron, but we still consume stories of cruelty. We still stare at depictions of horror. We still cannot look away from the breaking of the human body when it's presented as punishment, as justice, as spectacle. The methods may change, but the fascination endures. It is here that the moral lesson emerges. The breaking wheel is not simply a story about medieval punishment. It is a mirror. It shows us what societies will do when fear outweighs compassion, when justice becomes theatre, when cruelty is cloaked in ritual. It asks us whether we are truly so different, or whether we have only traded the wheel for other forms of spectacle, less visible, but no less real. Think of it. The Enlightenment promised an end to barbarity. Yet the 20th century saw cruelty on scales unimaginable to the Middle Ages. Concentration camps, gulags, mass executions, systems just as bureaucratic, just as systematic as the breaking wheel ever was. Civilization advances, yes, but the instinct to break, to display, to terrorize through the body of the condemned, it lingers. The wheel may be gone, but its spirit has found new shapes. And so, when we look back at that wooden frame rising in the square, at the crows circling above, at the silence of the crowd waiting for the first strike, we are not just looking at them, we are looking at ourselves, at the fragility of justice, at the thin line between order and cruelty, at the ease with which humanity can turn suffering into ritual and ritual into law. If this glimpse into humanity's darkest punishments makes you question how fragile civilization truly is, subscribe for more hidden stories history tried to bury. Because the truth is this: the wheel is gone, but the urge to break and display the human body has never truly disappeared.